Get ready. It's time for the Idaho Podcast with your host, Danny Ventura. Welcome to the Idaho Podcast, where we feature the people who live, work, and play in Idaho. Thanks for being with us today. My guest is Captain Bob Piazza, and Bob is chair of the Idaho Veterans Parade, which happens to be coming up here in November 2nd exactly. It's a Saturday in downtown Boise, Saturday morning at 10 a.m. on November 2nd. In addition to that, Bob is also the president and CEO of Price Pump Company. Bob, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for the opportunity to promote our parade this year.
Absolutely, my pleasure. What is your Idaho story, Bob? Are you a native? Did you move here? And if that's the case, what brought you here?
No, I'm not a native, but give me another 30 years and I can claim to be one. I moved here about 5 years ago from Northern California. I also moved Price Pump Company here from Northern California.
Okay.
And the natural question is why?
Yeah, and that was my question.
There's a multitude of reasons for that. Probably the most compelling one was in order to stay in business, we had to move the company. We manufacture pumps. We sell them all over the world, mostly in industrial environments. We didn't need to be in California. California is not our market. It's just that we were in business in California, not doing business in California. And it became more and more constraining. I grew up in California. I went to college in California. I've lived other places, certainly, but there was an affinity to it, and California was a great place to live. But again, back to the business aspect, I had difficulty hiring people from out of state. You couldn't afford to pay them what they needed to earn in order to buy a house and live in California. Taxation became a problem, and then government interference in business. California has a propensity for legislating more and more restrictive laws for business. Why they do it, I don't know. I guess they have a motive. But it just got to there was a drip, 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 the Chinese water torture. And then one day you wake up and you go, wow, I don't need this.
Right.
And then from a political standpoint, personally, I tend to be a bit more conservative, and California doesn't suit my political philosophies. And so we looked around for places to go. Where can we put the business? The chairman of Price Pump Company is here in Idaho. He's been here since 1986. He's also the founder. He and his wife are the founders of the Warhawk Air Museum in Nampa, if you've been there. He said to me, "Hey, come to Idaho. I can watch over you better here." And so finally, one day, the straw broke the camel's back, and I said, "Okay, John, I'm ready. Let's move."
Wow.
So we found a piece of property in Caldwell, and we built a brand new state-of-the-art manufacturing plant 5 years ago. And here we are.
Well, congratulations. And how is your family with your move, and how has the move been for you personally?
Well, obviously, I came here without any family other than my wife of now 59 years.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. The only wife in 59 years. You have to
I'm glad you clarified that. She's probably glad too.
Yeah, she is. She struggled a little bit with it. We had lived in our house in California for almost 30 years. She liked that house. My wife has always selected the houses that we've lived in throughout our marriage, except this one. I picked this one.
Oh, boy.
And that was a little more difficult for her to adjust to, but she did. There's no Nordstroms here. That was a big factor.
Yeah. Yep.
Since we moved here, in fact, about 3 years ago, my younger sister, moved here from Southern California. She's retired, although she did work when she first came up here. And then a year and a half ago, my grandson moved here. And then a year ago, his mother and father, my daughter and son-in-law, moved here with my great-granddaughter. In fact, they live half a mile from here.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's family up here. Who else? I don't know. We'll
There
see.
you go. Well, that's great. What are you enjoying most about Idaho so far?
Well, certainly I like the help of government rather than the interference of government, which is a big change. I certainly like the people. I'm not a religious sort, but there's a lot of religion here, and that's a good thing because it lends to people being, I think, politer or maybe just more tolerant of other people. You mentioned earlier in our discussion about young folks going into a restaurant, opening the door and holding it open for you. Yeah, you didn't think about that in California, but it doesn't happen there.
That's right.
Here it does, and you recognize it and you appreciate it. They're little things, but they're there. I like the taxation here and the way they go about taxation. I also like the fact that the legislature is not full-time. They're part-time.
Right.
And that limits the amount of legalization that goes on.
So true. And that's really how our founding fathers intended it to be. It was a part-time thing. And now it's become not only a career, but these folks go in, making this much money and then leave making this much money up high, and it's craziness.
Yeah. Making the money is not the problem.
Right.
I'm okay with that. Okay. The question is how.
That's exactly right. It's the how, and I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
I have no problem with. I'm a capitalist. I have no problem with people making money. But to your point, it's how. How did you do that? Making say $140,000 a year. How did you come out a multimillionaire?
You look at politics, state, and more importantly, national. And I know we're not here to talk about that.
That's
but,
okay.
Yeah, there are professional politicians. I won't name names, but you know who they are, and everybody else does too. They don't know anything else. They've never run a business. They've never met a payroll. They've never paid payroll taxes or Medicare taxes, or I could go on with a multitude of costs that are involved in running a business. And yet they continue to promote legislation for more and more taxation. And you ask the question, well, you want to tax more. What are you going to spend it on? I mean, are you going to pay down the debt, or are you going to find more things to spend it on? Why do you need to increase taxes? Nobody, I don't hear anybody asking that question today.
Yep.
But let's not go there.
Let's not go there. We don't have that kind of time.
No, and we're not going to solve it.
In the 60s, Bob, you served in the U.S. Navy during the Vietnam War, and you were an engineering officer aboard the USS Finch, conducting search and seizure operations. So tell us a little bit about those experiences during what was really a tumultuous time in our history.
Well, as we all know, the Vietnam War, quotations around it, really started back in the 50s. In the early 60s, 61, 62, the U.S. became more and more involved, primarily because the French had pulled out of Vietnam. I graduated from high school in 62. I actually joined the reserves in 61 while I was still in high school. I did it for a specific purpose. I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, and that was the only way I was going to get in, through the reserve program. And the reason I wanted that was the only way I was going to go to college. My parents didn't have money. They weren't politically involved. That wasn't in the cards. I wasn't into sports, so I wasn't going to get a scholarship. That was the only avenue, for me. And I recognized it, fortunately, and pursued it. As it turned out, I went to the California Maritime Academy rather than the Naval Academy, which worked out wonderfully, really, for me. Graduated in 65. The Navy said, you owe us 2 years. Okay. Of course, they had paid for some of that education at Cal Maritime. So I went on active. I received a commission as an officer and then discharged as an enlisted person. and immediately went on active duty to Vietnam on a destroyer escort. What we did, we patrolled the coastline of Vietnam within the 12-mile territorial limit for the purpose of interdicting coastal traffic, commercial traffic, boats, junks as they were called, and fishing vessels. The Viet Cong would go out during the daytime and sleep on these fishing boats. And then at night they go in and raise havoc. And of course there was a lot of contraband that would come down from the north, guns, ammunition, medical supplies, saltpeter, believe it or not, was a component of making gunpowder. Okay, so we would search these vessels for that kind of contraband and or suspected VC.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And you continued your military service as a reservist, progressing, as you mentioned, to the U.S. Navy rank of captain, and retiring shortly after the Gulf War in 1991. How did those military or war experiences, how have those shaped your life?
Well, patriotism had a little different flavor to it, I think, back in the 60s. Started to come under question in the 70s, reintroduced itself in the 80s. It goes through cycles. It's unfortunate because patriotism should be a 24/7 activity for most people.
Agreed.
I think probably the biggest factor that influenced me was having the opportunity to travel to other countries and see how people live on the other side of the railroad tracks. That was a biggie. For a young person, from the United States living in a very privileged environment, to see how other folks struggle just to get clean water to drink or a meal for the day is pretty significant. I'm a great proponent of the draft. I think it was a mistake doing away with it. I'm a great proponent of the Peace Corps that Kennedy instituted back in the 60s. It gives young people the opportunity to go see the other side of those railroad tracks. And I think it's important for the patriotic side of it, but also for their personal and economic development.
I agree. I agree with you on the patriotism piece. I didn't ever have to serve, nor have I enlisted. And by the way, thank you for your service as well. But I do agree with the patriotism part. And I think it wouldn't be as critical, in my opinion, but the fact that we're not even teaching it in school either. And so we're really limiting our opportunities for our young folks to really foster patriotism within them unless it comes from the family.
Well, yeah, they're not teaching that. They're not teaching history, and a lot of our history should lead to that patriotism. If you look at what went on many, many years ago, World War II, World War I, Civil War, and of course the War of Independence, you really need to have a basic understanding of all that in order to appreciate what this country is today, and we don't have that. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you have now, and I don't know if this was a segue, because obviously you're a veteran, but so it would make natural sense. But you've been serving now as chair of the Idaho Veterans Day Parade since 2023, and obviously you were involved with the parade prior to becoming the chair as well. But the event, as I mentioned at our opening, is held annually the first Saturday before Veterans Day, and is actually coming up this year, November 2nd. Starts at 10 a.m. in downtown Boise. What led to your involvement in the parade, and how has that affected your service as a veteran?
Well, the involvement came about in 2022, believe it or not. It wasn't that long ago. I've been very involved in the American Legion and the VFW, and of course out at the Warhawk Museum. The founders of the museum said to me one day, you ought to look at the Idaho Veterans Parade. You might enjoy getting involved in that. So I filled out an application and sent it in. The then chair called me up one day and said, "Hey, I got your application here. Why don't we get together for coffee?" Fine. So we did. So he asked me, he said, "Well, what do you see yourself doing on the committee?" I said, "I hadn't thought about it. I don't know what positions there are on the committee or where I could best contribute." So I guess the real answer is, where can I best contribute? And he said, "Well, I need a vice chair." And I said, "Well, I hadn't really thought of that. Maybe starting off something less." Well, I ended up vice chair that year. And then he informed me that he was retiring because he had done it for a few years. So I like to say that I got sucked into the vortex. What I mean by that is I certainly hadn't planned or wanted to ascend to being chairman, okay? Now, as chairman, I have to say that it's extremely rewarding. It's also a learning experience, and I'll tell you why. You've kind of gone over some of my career. I've almost always been in a leadership position where you're instructing other folks what to do. I'm choosing my words, Dan. When you get into a volunteer organization such as this committee, you're dealing with volunteers. You're not signing a paycheck for them, okay? You don't have that to hang over their heads if they don't do what you ask them to do, okay? It's not the military where you have to do what you're told to do, or somebody could die, or you could end up in jail or whatever, okay? You don't have any of that. You're dealing with volunteers. And so how you approach them is very, very different. And I find myself being more of a coach, a very mild director. You try not to dictate. There are times when, after a discussion of a particular subject is worn out and there's really no consensus, that you got to say, okay, we're going to do this. So I found that very rewarding, very different. Okay,
Sure, that's great. And so now you're the chair, and so it's probably fortuitous for the previous chair for you to sign up and say, "I just want to be involved," and then the next thing you know, you're vice chair, and now you're chair in a matter of a couple of years. So that speaks volumes to your leadership as well, and also your desire to want to serve. I think that's fantastic. I know the cost to put the parade on, because the parade's been going on since, I think, the 50s, but there was a hiatus there. It had gone away for a little while, I believe, correct?
Yeah, it started in the 50s after World War II, and probably around the time of Korea, from what we can figure out.
Okay.
And then in the late 60s, early 70s, there was a hiatus, probably because of the distaste folks had for the Vietnam War. And then it was revived in early 2000 by a retired Marine colonel, and has been carried on ever since.
I'm glad it was revived. That's really good. That's good. And so the cost to put the parade on each year is just over $50,000, and that's no small sum for sure, especially for a parade that is very, in my opinion, a very noble and worthwhile cause for our veterans many who have sacrificed so much, some of them the ultimate sacrifice of giving up their lives for our freedom and our country. But thanks to the generosity of local corporate sponsors, including Albertsons, Idaho Power, and, as you mentioned, Warhawk Museum, just to name a few, those entities help make it possible. But you also seek community sponsors as well. And in addition to attending the parade, what can our listeners or our community, what can they do to help support this worthy annual event?
Well, good question. Certainly, they can help promote the parade, the folks who are unaware of it. They can certainly participate financially if they care to do that. Any little bit helps. It's appreciated, okay? They could participate by coming on the committee and working with us for a year or two, contribute in that way. They can contribute in kind. If you're a business and you make something or provide some kind of service that would enhance the parade, We're a 501c3. We're more than happy to give you an in-kind certificate to give you a tax deduction for it. And then participation in the parade is two ways. One, you can be an observer. Love to have you. Like you said, it's the first part of November. Weather can be a bit problematic. But I had one person say, well, I'm not going to bring my Jeep because it's going to rain. And the answer to that was, well, the Jeeps were made to work in the rain. And then, of course, you can enter the parade with a float, or you can walk it, or whatever, as long as your participation in the parade is enhancing recognition of veterans and thanking them for their service.
Mm-hmm. And so if folks do want to get involved in some way, whether it's a donation or participate or even just attend the parade, is there a website they can go to for more information, or where would we send them?
Yes, there is a website, the usual Idaho Veterans, plural, yes, parade.org.
Okay.
Idaho Veterans Parade.org. They can email me directly, chair@IdahoVeteransParade.org.
Okay. And you don't have to put the apostrophe on that. It's just the Veterans Parade. Okay.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. IdahoVeteransParade.org.
Yes, sir.
Perfect. And that's fantastic. Aside from honoring veterans, which again is necessary and noble, and I believe in that, and commend the charge of your committee of what they're doing. What are some of the other main purposes of the parade, and also what are some of the highlights that we can expect this year, if you're willing to share them, for this coming up parade on November 2nd?
Sure. I think another aspect of the parade, probably number two, is education. We talked earlier about young folks today not getting historical education about this country and what it stands for. The parade should do that to some extent. In order to emphasize that, each year we have a theme for the parade. Last year, for example, it was the 70-year signing of the Korean Armistice. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, what was Korea all about?
Right.
Okay. The year before that, it was the anniversary, the birthday of the Air Force. Well, why? We thought the Air Force always was. Well, it was and it wasn't. Okay.
Right.
It used to be part of the Army. Not many people know that. This year, we're honoring the Idaho National Guard, the 116th Brigade, which deployed in 2004 to Iraq in force, in mass. Over 3,000 troops went over.
Oh, wow. And
a lot of equipment, okay? And this is their 20th anniversary this year. With that, we have our keynote speaker, Brigadier General Gayhart, who was the commander of the brigade in 2004. And then we are honoring as our Grand Marshal Major General Garshak, who just retired as the commander of the Idaho National Guard.
Interesting. I have not been to the parade yet. I'm hoping to attend this year. Do they also have you share and present military equipment and vehicles and artillery, that type of thing?
A parade wouldn't be a parade.
I would agree, but I didn't want to assume.
One, and it's a good point, a side issue. People ask, why is it not on Veterans Day? Veterans Day is November 11th. Well, the problem with November 11th is it's on a different day of the week each year. And I don't think the merchants in Boise would want Jefferson shut down for a couple of hours during the weekday. It just doesn't work. Sundays tend to be a problem because, again, we spoke earlier about Idaho and its significant religious involvement. Folks go to church Sunday morning, and so they're not going to come to a parade.
Sure.
So it has to be a Saturday, number one. This is not my idea. This was thought of a long time ago. Secondly, we do it on the Saturday before the 11th. It's got to be somewhat close to it. Mm-hmm. But it just so happens that Saturday or that weekend before the Veterans Day is when the Idaho National Guard has their drill weekend. These guys do this on the weekend, okay? Right. And in order to get their participation, it's easier to do that on a drill weekend because it's part of their functioning and drilling. You try to do that on an off weekend, they either have to get these guys to volunteer their time, or they got to pay them, and it's taxpayer dollars that's paying them. So you don't want to really go there,
Sure.
Particularly if you're a capitalist. So that's the reason why we have it on that day. Okay.
Good to know. So, Bob, we always end the show with the tip of the show. And TIP is the acronym for the Idaho Podcast. So it's TIP. What is your tip for our listeners and our community today?
Oh, I'm going to give you a life tip.
Okay.
Okay. I didn't hear this from someone. I made this up a long time ago. Okay. And I think if you dwell on it after we get out of here, you'll get the point. It's not the ups and downs in life that get you. It's the jerks.
It's not the ups and downs of life that get you. It's the jerks. Boy, that is profound. Well, I appreciate you sharing that.
And thank you again, Dan, for this opportunity.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming on. Again, thank you for your service to our country. Thank you for your continued service in putting this parade on and honoring our veterans on a regular basis. And may God continue to bless your work, and may you have just abundant blessings on this event as it continues to succeed, and people come to not only build notoriety around it as far as awareness, but also, as you said, education, and to promote appreciation for these folks who have sacrificed so much for our freedoms and for our country. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. And let me remind your listeners and viewers that November 2nd, 10 a.m., 8th and Jefferson, right in front of the State House. That's where it begins.
All right.
Weather, dress accordingly.
It's Idaho, folks. Weather can change in an hour.
Oh, by the way, we're going to have some heavy equipment from the Idaho National Guard there this year. Hopefully, an Abrams tank, Bradley, and a few others, and we're going to have a flyover of National Guard helicopters.
Oh, wow. Okay. Exciting stuff. Well, thanks again, Bob. Really appreciate that. Folks, I encourage you to go out and attend that parade, support our veterans, and support our community. November 2nd, 10 a.m., downtown Boise. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. And thanks to Bob and his committee and all the work that they're doing to honor our veterans, especially right here in Idaho. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you enjoyed the show, and I, above all, hope you have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.